We're in the 10th chapter of, 11th chapter of Contemplative Life. And although the subject is supply, it would be like discussing one little finger on your hand to leave it at that level. We have to see the allness of being in order to realize the nature of supply. And so we'll be reaching out to other elements of this work. Next week we will complete this book, even though it's a chapter about Christmas. Christ is next week as well as at the 25th of December, and so we'll do that chapter next week. And then on the following Sunday, which I think is the 27th of June, we will begin the Mystical Eye, the new book of Joel, for at least 12 weeks into early October, probably. And so that's the continuous program. There'll be no interruption for the 4th of July. We know that a fish never struggles to swim, nor does a bird struggle to fly. These come naturally. And we want to learn why the Son of God seems to struggle for supply. When we are told that we are to take no thought for our life, what we shall eat, what we shall wear. In other words, supply is just as natural to the Son of God as swimming is to a fish or flying to a bird. It's the very nature of our being. Perhaps as we look at supply and see that we have a concept about it, we begin to notice that we have limited supply down to what we believe finitely. We think supply should be money, dollars, homes, investments, income. But this is the concept of the earthman. And although the Father knoweth our needs, and although it is the good pleasure of the Father to give us the kingdom, we somehow think that we have to decide in what way the kingdom should come to us. And before we know it, we have split away from truth. We have entered into concept, into the perception of the senses, into the world illusion, and soon we say, my supply has been limited. And then we face what we consider financial problems. And so we find that 1 out of every 100 may be immune to this, or maybe 1 out of 1,000. But everywhere we go, we find financial problems, limitations and lack, even though the Son of God is unlimited. When we do mental work to correct this, we go through the illusion that with the human mind, I can permanently improve my condition. And so we take truth and we try to apply truth. And alas, we discover that you cannot apply truth. Truth is truth, and truth is self-fulfilling and self-acting. The moment you are applying truth, you haven't got truth at all. And so always we're stymied about this supply thing until we begin to have confidence in the Bible. It literally means what it tells us. And it gives us the most unusual way to solve the supply problem. It's so revolutionary that when we look at it, we can't believe it. It says the way to solve supply is to take no thought about it. We do not believe that seriously the Spirit could mean such a thing. And yet it precisely says that and gives us many examples, and the Master himself shows us that his own disciples go forth without supply. No purse, no scrip. But they're prepared for the journey with knowledge of self, knowing that identity is supply. Now let's look closely at the revolutionary teaching about taking no thought for supply in order to have supply. And perhaps it would be wise to see why, with our application of truth and our thought about truth, we have failed to really nail down the meaning of supply. You know that the teaching of Jesus starts with God is Spirit. That's the foundation. In the beginning, God. And if you do not start with God, you have no place to start. Because God is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, Spirit. And you must begin there. God is Spirit. And quickly follows, God is all. Spirit is all. The allness of Spirit is the fact. And because Spirit can only beget itself, because like must beget like, Spirit can only beget Spirit and never become anything else. Spirit remains Spirit. The allness of Spirit remains the allness of Spirit, and there is nothing but Spirit. And this is the revolutionary teaching, then, of the Bible. God is Spirit, Spirit is all, Spirit begets itself, and there is nothing but Spirit, and you are faced with the fact that matter is unreal. And so any concept of supply that has to do with matter is an unreal concept. It is destined to failure. You cannot find material supply. You may call it material supply and discover to your chagrin that it isn't. And we find that matter being unreal, because Spirit can only beget Spirit and Spirit is all, we have to identify this matter, and we find that the Bible is telling us that it is a mental concept. That all matter is imagination. And it tells us that this imagination is cosmic, a universal imagination. And that through our sense perceptions we become aware of what is called matter, which is imagination, and therefore we have mental matter. All matter, according to the Christ teaching, is made of the human mind. In other words, you're seeing nothing except what is in your mind. Nothing is there outside of your mind. As far as the eye can see, you're looking at your own mind. And you're calling it matter, place, person, thing, and condition, but it is your mind. You're looking at your thought everywhere. And now your thought says, I like, I need, I want, I desire, I must pay the rent. But God is all and God is Spirit. Spirit begets only Spirit. That which is not Spirit is not there, is not real. What are you lacking? You're lacking Spirit. But you think you're lacking matter, and therefore you perpetuate the illusion of lack by seeking the matter that you're not lacking. You don't even have it when you have it. You cannot have it or lack it. It doesn't exist. And so a spiritual teaching is about Spirit as all. And finally we see that the senses have fooled us into seeking that which has no existence in reality. We have called it supply, but we were seeking a material identity which is mental, which is imagination. And it could never fully satisfy us for that reason, even if we secured that which we sought. And finally, it is all wrapped up with the idea that the material world is cosmic imagination. Hypnosis of the senses, unreal, illusory. And the Master says, seek not the things that perish. Now, once we have established this as fact, once we have confidence in God, knowing what God is talking about through Jesus Christ, we see that we are told that the world of matter is not reality. It is not my Father's kingdom, and therefore it is not here. It is one cosmic appearance in the mind. And matter being unreal, the motion of matter must be equally unreal. And now we're coming to the place where we may be ready to know what is meant by Son, all that I have is thine. But we're not quite ready because the mind is still under the influence of concept. Now let's go way, way back into concept. Let's just take our little earth, which is our material concept. And there it goes, spinning around the sun. And while it spins, it's turning on its axis away from the sun. And now the sun hits the earth, and then behind the earth is the shadow of the earth. The sun shining on the earth spinning on its axis, behind the earth its own shadow, shaped in the form of an ice cream cone. The whole width of the earth casts a conical shadow behind itself. And you're somewhere on that earth, and you're going to pass through that shadow. You're going to enter the shadow on one side. You're going to pass through the complete shadow of the earth. And then you're going to pass out of the shadow of the earth on the other side. And all of that time is going to be called nighttime. And when you come out of the shadow of the earth, you're going to say it's dawn, it's morning, it's sunrise. And now you're in daytime. And the whole concept of day and night is whether or not you're in the shadow of the earth. But there is no material earth. There is only spirit. That which isn't there is casting a shadow which cannot be there. And the concept of night and day is based upon that which is not there. From that concept of day and night, we get time. We measure the movement. We say that time takes 12 hours for the night to come and go. 12 hours for the day. And then in that time, we measure the movement of objects which are not there. It takes an hour to run from here to there. 5 hours from New York to San Francisco. First, we measure night by the passing through the shadow of the earth. And outside of that shadow, there is no night. And in the same manner, outside of our concept of matter, there is no death, and there is no aging process, and there is no time. And our concept of objects moving in time builds our sense of space, because time and space exist only because we fill them with shadows called objects. Now you sit down and try to figure this all out with your mind and try to form some kind of intelligent direction to take through it, and you find you cannot. It's the same way with trying with your mind to figure out what you're going to do about supply. The hopelessness of it is that the very earth you stand on is an illusion. You're looking at your concept of the spiritual earth, and you're identifying everything you see with that which itself has no existence, with material eyes, with material ears, with a material sense of touch. And spirit can only beget spirit. So non-existence identifies non-existence. Supply in the midst of this is very minor. But there is a law that removes from us the necessity for taking thought about supply, or else the Master would not have revealed that the way out of the dilemma of supply is through taking no thought. The law of transformation, when known to your consciousness, enables you to confidently relax, knowing that supply is the natural action of your true being. So let's look at that law of transformation. Let's see that supply is an expression of yourself and not something you reach out to draw into yourself. Let's look at the orange tree, and let's remember that the orange is not producing more oranges. The orange is the result of an action in the tree. And as long as you have the orange tree, you're not too concerned about the oranges coming out of the tree. You're not worried about getting oranges. You have the tree. And when the tree produces oranges and they fall off, you don't say, I have no more supply. You say, I have no more fruit. But you know the tree will continue to produce new oranges, and therefore you identify the tree as your supply. And you identify the oranges as the fruit of your supply. You know there's a law of transformation going on. You know the tree is doing something about minerals, about water, about air, about sunlight, and combining them, transforming them into sap, and it is pushing forth the fruitage or the oranges. Even when the tree is bare, you're not concerned. Whether you're awake or asleep, you're not concerned. As long as you have the tree, you will have the fruit of the tree. You know the law of transformation is taking place. Now, there is such a law in our life. We call it the law of transforming life. We know that the substance of our being is our supply, just as the tree and its sap is its supply. And we know that as the substance of our being flows as our consciousness, it forms itself into those things which are needed. We learn that from the Master's teaching. As the sparrow can forget where it will be fed, as the lily can forget how it will be clothed, because from within itself something is forming. We learn that within the Son of God something is ever forming. And Son, all that I have is thine. Let the law of transformation continue to flow through you, as you, manifesting its perfection wherever you are. Do not interfere, just as you would not interfere with the activity of the tree. And watch how the oranges or the added things appear as you become conscious of the law of transformation. Now we know this law exists And we have failed to do one thing. We have placed a barrier between the law and our experience of it. And the barrier is unawareness. Your consciousness of the law builds the bridge which permits the law to enter through and express. When you are not conscious of the law, it could not become an expression in your life. Now let's say we become conscious of the law of transformation. First, we must be the Son of God. The law of transformation doesn't work in a human being. Son, all that I have is thine. Not human being, not dust man, not earth man, not man made of atoms. Son, divine Son. And we have been stressing identity now for 6 weeks in this class. Identity. We have had re-identification. And so if you are not the child of God, if you are still this physical, mortal being who cannot be, the law of transformation is not taking place through your mortal selfhood. Spirit cannot act outside of spirit. Spirit cannot act in an illusion. If you have not taken the time and the effort to re-identify, to accept yourself as divine substance, divine being, divine self, if you have no confidence whatsoever in the Word of God or Jesus Christ, which is expressing the Word of God, or in the Bible, which is the Word of God and Jesus Christ, then the law of supply cannot function in your being. It will not function in the man of dust. But as you re-identify, as you accept that God is my Father, I have no Father on the earth but God, then you are accepting that I, the Son, and the Father are never separate. I, the substance of God, am Spirit, never less than infinite Spirit, never less than true being, never apart from infinity. And now you are realigning yourself. You are fulfilling the first requisite, correct identity, divine self. You are taking possession. And now in this self, we are in conscious union with God. And the moment you're in conscious union with the Spirit of God as your spirit, you are in touch with every divine idea. Nothing is missing in the Spirit of God. Son, every divine idea is in the Spirit of God, which is the life of you. If you have no confidence in the life of God as your life, you have discovered the barrier that you have placed between you and the experience of your natural supply. It has lain there unexpressed because of lack of recognition. And now as you think of it, as you know yourself to be life divine, not matter, but life divine, you are saying to your senses, I am not fooled by you. I am Spirit. I embody all that God has. All that the Father hath is mine. And I have confidence in the law of life, which is that all that the Father hath, which is mine, is expressing itself now, here. And therefore that which I have experienced is the lie. The moment you have the presence of God where you stand realized, you have discovered more than the law of supply. You have discovered the law of eternal life. The moment you accept the presence of God, every problem in your life is revealed as a lie. Now let's see what you're lacking in supply right this minute. What are you lacking? You're lacking knowledge of God's presence, that's all. You can't be lacking supply. Supply is God. Where God is, supply is. That's the law. In my presence is fullness of joy. And what you're really saying when you say I lack is that you lack the knowledge of God's presence. In the beginning, God. You haven't begun with God. You started with matter and you try to work back to God and you can't. There's no way. Matter has no existence. It can't go back into spirit. You must begin with spirit. To have spirit, to enjoy spirit, to live in spirit and experience spirit, you must begin with spirit. So in the beginning of your meditation, in the beginning of your contemplation, God, spirit. If you want spirit, you must begin with spirit. Always, Jesus began with God. He didn't work back from matter to God. I am the Father of one. I am the way. I, now in the midst of you, am greater than he that walks the earth. We have lacked confidence in God, in God's Word, in our own spiritual identity as the one Son of God. And so in creeps the belief of a separation. Now you could just as well have said you had dizzy spells or stomach aches, as well as saying you lack supply, and you would find the knowledge of God's presence is the answer to all three. The knowledge of God's presence is the answer to every problem. And while we have been trying to memorize page 26 in a book, or page 39 in the Bible, or what did Joel say in 1952 at such and such a lecture, we have forgotten the basic principle is, where you realize the presence of God, omniscience does the rest, omnipotence does the rest, omnipresence does the rest. And you may be sure that every important word in the Bible and in Joel's writing was put there by the mind of God, which knows. And so we begin to let go of this calculating, planning, striving mind. We don't have to struggle. We don't have to use strategy. We don't have to plan. We have to do precisely what it tells us to do. Take no thought. Why? Because once you have established that God is present here, now, the work is done. There comes a surge of knowledge that God is here. And then every word in the Bible rings with a new clarity. It is my pleasure to give you the kingdom. Now watch all of the added things appear. Why? Because the law of transformation is taking place in your consciousness. Wherever you look, whatever you see, whatever you experience, it isn't what you think it is, it's your consciousness. Your consciousness is made visible and becomes your experience. Your whole universe is your consciousness. There's no outside. There is absolutely nothing outside your consciousness. If it is, you're unconscious of it. What you are conscious of is your world. And the quality of that consciousness determines the quality of your world. Now, when we look at the wheats and tares, we find something very fascinating. That parable shows us the difference between our thoughts about supply and the truth about supply. Our thoughts about health and the truth about health. Always the wheat stands for divine thought. And the tare, or the weed, stands for human thought or sense perception. You have them growing right alongside each other in your consciousness, in your field. And the sense perception or the tare says, I lack supply. But you really don't. You lack the awareness of the supply that is there. You are entertaining a concept, and you are not suffering from lack. There is no one in this world suffering from lack. They are suffering from the acceptance of the illusion that God is not there. Unaware of the presence of God in their consciousness. Their consciousness cannot manifest that quality of God which is called abundance. But they are not lacking. Their lack is lack of conscious union with the presence of God. And that manifests as lack. You can lack health, but you're lacking conscious union with the presence of God, and that manifests as health. And so while you are trying and dedicating yourself to what you think is truth, the tares creep in to your consciousness because you still depend on sense perception. You still believe that the world around you is out there because your senses say it's out there, and it isn't out there. There is no outside out there. There is nothing external to you. The universe that you experience is your consciousness. And you must take possession of that universe by getting rid of the tares and not going out to just pluck them indiscriminately and uprooting the wheat at the same time, but daily separating tares from the wheat, separating sense perception from acceptance of the living presence of God here, letting everything come through your conscious awareness of the presence. And then divine thought, the wheat, begins to feed your consciousness. And the tares, the weeds, the human sense perceptions begin to dissolve, and your consciousness, being only the wheat, only divine thought, externalizes as divine activity and shows the law of transformation of consciousness. Divine thought transforms, and the consciousness outpictures heaven on earth. You're out of the shadow of earth, where there is no night, where there is no darkness, where there is no death, where there is no old age, where there is no condition unlike the perfection of God's presence. Take no thought for your life is, in a sense, a paradox. It's like that paradox last week. Be still and know. And we found out that if we're still in the mind, we will know in the soul. And here again, we are told, take no thought. We also know we're told to pray without ceasing. How can we pray without ceasing and take no thought at the same time? We're also told to acknowledge the Father in all our ways. How can we take no thought and acknowledge the Father? And so we put on our high boots and we have to wade into that one. We have to separate these thoughts because each of them is important. Each is to open us up. Each must be faced instead of merely repeated in the mind. We are to know the truth that sets us free, and yet take no thought. We are to separate the wheat from the tares, and yet take no thought. You see, everything is forcing you into a sequence in which you begin to accept only divine thought. All that is sense perception, we begin to weed out of consciousness. We take no human thought. No human thought is acceptable. No sense thought is acceptable. No belief in anything finite is acceptable. No belief in imperfection is acceptable. Who convinceth me of sin? No sin is acceptable. No unfulfilled need is acceptable. There cannot be an unfulfilled need. Every limiting thought is released. Every ungodly thought is released. Every thought of lack and limitation and sin and disease is released. And then you're forced to the higher ground. The acceptance that when I cease being man whose breath is in his nostrils, when I cease being a person, when I ceased having friends and enemies, when I begin to accept the divinity of my being, then I can rest in that divinity without thought. Taking no thought is only possible when you have accepted divine selfhood, because then the mind of the Father is your mind. Taking no thought forces you into the acceptance of immortality now. But now Joel comes along and tells us so many interesting ways in which, even when we think we know the truth about supply, we still have barriers. We have not known, for example, that supply cannot come to us unless we have sent it forth. And you say, how can I send it forth? I don't know how. I don't know where to find it. And yet, it cannot come to you until you have sent it forth. And then he says, you must obey the law of secrecy. And we never connected that with supply. Now, there are quite a number of ways in which Joel teaches us to express supply spiritually. Mind you, you're standing in the consciousness of divine selfhood, knowing that all that the Father hath is mine. The tree of life is ever sending forth its fruit. God being perfect, the expression of God in me must be perfect. And in that you have confidence, trust. You rest without question, without seeking or striving or struggling or planning. You're accepting. And now, because supply is spiritual, if you're looking for physical supply, you're missing the point. Spiritual supply manifests as invisible spiritual fruitage. That is why you cannot see divine supply. That is why you can be fooled by physical supply. Always, the fruitage of supply is as spiritual as the supply itself. And when you have the knowledge of that spiritual manifestation, then in the visible, it shows forth as your improved concept of dollar, home, financing, food, clothing, shelter. Always the visible is merely the concept or idea we entertain about the invisible. Between the supply itself and the visible manifestation, there is an invisible manifestation known only to the child of God. And that consciousness of it transforms into the visible. Now, you are not conscious spiritually of that manifestation if there are certain things in your outer work that you're not doing, because these are the signs. If you're not praying for your enemies, it is because you're not conscious of the invisible circle of Christ. You may think this has nothing whatsoever to do with supply, but yet that's the very core of the chapter. It has everything to do with it. Acknowledge me in all thy ways. You want spiritual supply, but you will not acknowledge spirit as the allness. And you see, when you're praying for your enemies, that is because you are aware of the spiritual nature of each individual who appears as an enemy. Forgiveness. To forgive the offender. Why? Because the Father says, forgive 70 times 7. And you say, what's that got to do with supply? Well, that's the point. You can't deny spirit over here and expect spirit on the other side to shower you with fruit. You must acknowledge me in all thy ways. If you do this unto the least of these, my brethren, you do it unto me. In other words, you don't have a spiritual consciousness. How can you have spiritual supply? A spiritual consciousness is forgiving all offenders. And Joel says it isn't even enough to forgive those who in some way are unfriendly to you. No, you must forgive those who offend your neighbor. You must forgive those who offend your race. You must forgive those who offend your nation and your religion. And then he says, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of God. Oh, we overlooked all that. We were too busy trying to get supply. Yes, you want spiritual supply, then acknowledge spirit as the substance of the universe. Look past the form. And so he teaches us, both the Master and Joel, to look past the forms of the offending, persecuting neighbor, country, religion, or whatever it might be that is offending in some way. And to forgive all on the face of the earth by the recognition of their divine selfhood. And if you haven't reached the level where this is a normal thing for you, then the lack of supply will continue to be a burden. Then he says there are other things too. He says one of the greatest is gratitude. And that's where the secrecy comes in. Do not your alms in public. Now that has a special meaning. In the first place, the giving is not to a person. In the second place, the giving is not from a person. It is the expression of your spiritual selfhood. And it is the recognition of spiritual selfhood. Always, gratitude is the recognition of a spiritual source and a spiritual recipient. And until you have caught the feeling of expressing, then the spiritual consciousness still is not there. Now, those who give great benevolences are not giving spiritually. The widow's mite was more important. It was what her capacity was that counted. She gave all she had. Who did she give it to? Nobody. She expressed her recognition of spirit. Joel says this is the most important barrier to overcome in the understanding of spiritual selfhood and in the expressing of spiritual supply. And the one thing he cautions us against is the same thing Jesus cautioned us against. Whatever your alms are, wherever your charities or benevolences are, how many orphans you keep, how many sick people you support, this is all within yourself. It is your recognition of spiritual selfhood everywhere. But there's a secret behind that too. And the secret is that secrecy is necessary because there's nobody to tell. The moment you feel that there's somebody to tell, you have gone out of the belief in one invisible selfhood. You're coming into multiplicities. You're coming into personalities. And the giving is no longer spiritual recognition. The giving now is for a consideration, for a pride, for a vanity. And the point of it is gone. $1 million given from a human standpoint is not spiritual giving. It is not based on spiritual recognition. It has nothing to do with spiritual living or spiritual identity. Service is a great way of expressing spiritual awareness. But the way you express that service, if you happen to be in a business which serves the public, you may discover that you have your ups and downs. But when you understand what you do spiritually, and when you are endeavoring to fulfill a spiritual rather than a human need, when you are looking through the human need to the spiritual need behind it, you will discover a great secret. Whereas in your physical, human way, you had been going up and down, pleasing some and not pleasing others. The moment you find the spiritual need that you can fulfill in your work, you'll find you always hit the target, and the need for you is increased. Any business that can transform its understanding into fulfilling spiritual needs, in other words, not the supply of an individual, not the fruitage of an individual, but the inner spiritual selfhood of the individual, will find that it is always sought after. That's how an artist or a composer achieves more lasting distinction. The need that is reached is deeper. It touches something in the soul of the individual. That's what makes Shakespeare an immortal writer. And when we are doing this with the idea of serving others spiritually, from our own spiritual resources and serving their spiritual needs, we discover that we have an increased awareness of our own inventive genius. Talents that we had thought were not there begin to emerge, and talents that we knew were there begin to show a depth we hadn't suspected. It's the same as the physical supply. Once you fall into the law of transformation, so that the invisible begins to work through into the visible, by your awareness of its presence, this transformation is not just in supply. You remember the lame beggar who had asked Peter and John at the gate for money? Gold and silver have I none. They didn't give him physical supply. But he leaped jubilantly. He walked for the first time in his life. They gave him freedom. They gave him his own substance. And that was to teach us that when you ask humanly, we know not what to ask for. He would have been content with a few pieces of silver. Instead, he walked. We would be content with increased, what we call supply. That's not enough. That's the human finite mind saying, if I have another 30 pieces of silver, everything will be all right. That's the deceiver. That lack of supply is going to plague us until we are lifted up beyond. Until we come to the place where I know my identity as the very substance of all supply. And then instead of just giving me additional silver, it will enable me to walk in the kingdom. It will give me my freedom. That's the supply. The real supply is spiritual consciousness, spiritual righteousness. To know spirit aright is life eternal. Would you trade life eternal for 30 pieces of silver? Every problem, whether it's supply or health or whatever, is an arrow pointing to higher consciousness. It's saying that when you find me in you, then your freedom begins. Now suppose we look at take no thought, find out if there is something in this very familiar series of verses that says something new to us. Suppose we read all the invisible ink. And see that there was a revolutionary way of thinking and of living that was being presented. A way so unique that we today, who are still seeking increased supply, have clearly overlooked the Master's message. And so he said to his disciples, take no thought for your life. What ye shall eat, neither for the body, nor what ye shall put on. If we're to accept that, then the only way you can is to change the concept of your life. This life, yes, you've got to take thought about it. But take no thought for your life, your real life. And so, in the twinkling of an eye, he has revealed that our real life is so perfect, as our Father, that there's nothing to take thought about. He's lifting us into the consciousness that we are God life. Be ye perfect as your Father now. And you will admit that if you knew yourself to be the perfect God life now, would you take thought? And so when you're taking thought, you are rejecting identity. You are saying, I am not God life, I must take thought about it. Reverse that. I don't have to become God life. There's nothing I must do to become the Son of God. Spirit is all there is. I accept the teaching of Jesus Christ. God is spirit, God is all. I am spirit. My life is spirit. Now it's just a matter of controlling the sense mind which wants to take thought as if I was something other than spirit life. You see how clear that is? Take no thought for your life because your life is divine life now. And every time you take thought for your life, you are rejecting your own being. You are stepping right out of divine self. Divine self doesn't have to worry about the clothes it wears. Does the light go down to the city of Paris? Does the light go into the shops on Fifth Avenue? You don't take thought for your clothes because you are the light. And so here's the message of identity, and we have been saying, how foolish, how can I live without taking thought? When what we have had to say, and what we shall say as we open our eyes, is they're telling me I am divine life, I am the light of the world, I am perfect now as my Father. And then I shall reorientate this consciousness to know this. I am. And so we dwell for a moment in the I am, divine light. And the light that I am requires no human food. The light that I am requires no human clothing, no human supply, no human companionship. The light that I am requires no thing, for the light that I am is infinite light. In the beginning, God, and the light of God was the life of all men. And this is my life now. Do you see then that when you begin with identity, what follows will flow in the rhythm of identity? But if you start on the lower echelons of a me with a clothing and a food budget, you can't work back to identity. So at the moment we're going to stand in identity and let these words reveal to us who we are.